There's a reason the Golden Arches have remained iconic for so long. McDonald's represents childhood nostalgia, fast food cravings, and a quick bite at any hour. But beneath that bright yellow M, there are stories. Stories not of greasy fries and Big Macs, but of darkness, terror, and the unexplained. The deeper you go into the heart of those stories, the more you realize that some places, even ones as familiar as McDonald's, hold a kind of sinister energy. And sometimes, just sometimes, they let you in. Chapter 1. The Late Shift. It was a quiet Thursday evening, and Jack had just clocked in for his overnight shift at the McDonald's on the edge of town. The location was known to be a bit eerie, positioned just off a lonely highway with very few visitors after midnight. But it paid well, and Jack had never been one to believe in ghost stories. That night, as the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., a strange fog rolled in, wrapping itself around the restaurant. Jack noticed it, but he shrugged it off as nothing. He had grown used to the oddities of working nights. Strange people passing through, a few creepy incidents, but nothing out of the ordinary. The first sign of something wrong came when the automatic door opened on its own. Jack was wiping down tables when the swoosh of the door caught his attention. He glanced up but saw no one. He chuckled to himself, blaming the wind or maybe a sensor malfunction. He went back to cleaning, but then it happened again. This time the door didn't just open, it stayed open, and cold air poured in, making the entire restaurant drop in temperature. Jack cursed under his breath and headed to the front to see what was going on. As he reached the door, something strange caught his eye. There, just beyond the threshold, stood a figure. Dressed in an old, tattered McDonald's uniform, a man stood completely still. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. Jack blinked, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. "Hey, we're closed for dine-in," Jack called out, trying to sound tough despite the eerie feeling creeping up his spine. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly turned and walked away into the fog, disappearing into the night. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding. He decided to lock the door, making sure nothing else could come in, but things only got worse. The order that never came. McDonald's often gets strange orders, especially late at night, but this one was different. Around 3 a.m., the drive-thru speaker crackled to life and a voice whispered, "One Happy Meal, please." Jack jumped at the sudden sound. He glanced at the cameras, but no car appeared at the drive-thru lane. He picked up the headset. Could you repeat that?" The voice came again, softer this time, almost like a child's. "One Happy Meal, please." Jack leaned toward the window, looking out into the empty parking lot. Nothing. He shrugged, figuring it was some prank, and went back to his tasks. 5 minutes later, the drive-thru speaker crackled again, but this time the whisper was louder. "I said, 1 Happy Meal, please." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He grabbed the headset, hesitating before responding. "We're closed. No orders right now," he said, a little more forcefully this time. Silence. Then suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back door, the delivery entrance. Jack's heart raced as he grabbed a broomstick, the closest thing he had to a weapon. Slowly, he crept to the back of the restaurant. The door was slightly ajar, swinging gently on its hinges, but no one was there. He pulled it closed and locked it, but when he turned around, he froze. Sitting on the counter, where no one had been just moments ago, was a Happy Meal, a small cardboard box adorned with the familiar smiley face. But something was off. The red of the box was too dark, like it had been soaked in something. His stomach turned as he noticed the smell. It wasn't the usual scent of fries and burgers. It was something metallic, something foul. Jack reached for the box, his hand trembling, and lifted the lid. Inside, instead of a toy, was an old, cracked McDonald's name tag. The name had been scratched out, but the badge was smeared with what looked like dried blood. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant flickered and went out, plunging Jack into darkness. The PlayPlace Incident. A few months after Jack's incident, a mother named Grace took her 2 children to a different McDonald's in the neighboring town. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and the PlayPlace was deserted except for her kids, Molly and Ethan. The rain came down in heavy sheets, and the windows fogged up as Grace sat by the corner, sipping her coffee. She kept an eye on her children as they climbed through the colorful tubes and slides. But then, something strange happened. Molly, her youngest, waved down from the top of the play structure and yelled, "Mommy, there's a man in here!" Grace's heart skipped a beat. She immediately stood up, her eyes scanning the play place. There was no way anyone else could have entered without her noticing. "Sweetie, there's no one in there," she called back, trying to keep her voice calm. But Molly insisted, "He's in the ball pit." Grace hurried over to the entrance of the play place, calling for her kids to come down. Ethan slid out first, but Molly stayed at the top, pointing toward the pit of brightly colored balls. "Molly, come down now," Grace demanded. Reluctantly, Molly made her way down the slides and Grace went to the ball pit. She stared at it, feeling uneasy. Her mind raced with logical explanations. Maybe Molly saw a shadow or imagined it. But something about the way the balls were shifting, as if something was moving underneath them, made her blood run cold. She grabbed her kids and rushed them out of the play place. Later that night, after putting her children to bed, Grace decided to do some research. To her horror, she found an old article about a man who had been arrested for luring children into the play place at that very same McDonald's years ago. He had disappeared before his trial, and his body was never found. The next morning, Grace went back to the McDonald's to confront the manager. She asked if there had ever been any strange incidents in the play place. The manager paled, hesitated, and then admitted something chilling. "Every so often," he said, "a kid claims to see a man in the play place, but we've never found anyone, alive at least." The basement. Some McDonald's locations, particularly the older ones, have basements. They're usually used for storage, places employees rarely go. But one location had a basement no one dared enter. In the early 90s, a McDonald's in a small Midwest town was known for strange occurrences. Food would go missing, equipment would malfunction, and sometimes employees would hear whispers coming from the stairwell that led down to the basement. One day, after several complaints about the basement's strange smell, the manager decided to investigate. He took a flashlight and descended the narrow stairs, the air growing colder with each step. As he reached the bottom, his flashlight flickered, and the smell hit him like a wave, rotting meat. He gagged, covering his nose, but what he saw next made him drop the flashlight. There, in the middle of the basement floor, was a pile of old McDonald's uniforms, all stained with something dark and sticky. But that wasn't the worst part. Peeking out from beneath the pile was a hand, skeletal and pale. The police were called, and they uncovered something even more horrifying. The uniforms belonged to employees who had gone missing over the past few decades. No one had connected the disappearances to the McDonald's before, but now it seemed obvious. The restaurant was shut down, but locals still claim that at night, if you drive by the abandoned building, you can hear the faint sound of the drive-thru speaker crackling to life, whispering, "One happy meal, please." Epilogue. The world is filled with urban legends and haunted places, but sometimes the scariest horrors hide in plain sight. Next time you pull up to a McDonald's, consider the stories. Maybe the cashier looks a little too pale. Maybe the PlayPlace feels just a bit too quiet. Or maybe, just maybe, the drive-thru speaker will whisper something to you late at night. The golden arches always smile, but behind those smiles, something dark may be lurking. Would you like fries with that? The mirror in the restroom. Sarah had been working at McDonald's for almost a year, always opting for the evening shifts. The job was tedious, but easy, and the co-workers were friendly. The only thing that bothered her was the restroom. It wasn't the cleanliness or the smell, but rather the mirror. It hung slightly crooked, like someone had hastily bolted it to the wall. Every time Sarah went in, she felt like there was something wrong with her reflection. It was subtle, but sometimes her reflection seemed delayed. She brushed it off as her imagination. One night, while closing up, Sarah had to clean the women's restroom. As she finished scrubbing the sinks, she noticed something strange in the mirror. Her reflection was there, but it didn't move. She froze, staring into the glass. She blinked. Her reflection didn't. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly reached out toward the mirror, praying it was some kind of trick or illusion. Her reflection's hand stayed still, resting at its side, watching her. Suddenly, the reflection smiled, but Sarah wasn't smiling. She backed away, terror building inside her. Her reflection's grin widened, stretching too far, unnaturally, until the lips cracked and bled. Sarah screamed and ran out of the restroom, locking the door behind her. The next morning, she reported the incident to the manager, but they dismissed it as stress and fatigue. Yet, after that night, Sarah avoided the restroom altogether. She couldn't shake the feeling that her reflection was still in there, waiting for her to come back. A few months later, another employee, a new hire, was assigned to clean the same restroom. After a while, the manager realized she hadn't come back. Concerned, they went to check on her. They found the door locked from the inside, but when they finally forced it open, the restroom was empty. The mirror, however, was shattered. Blood spattered across the shards that still clung to the wall. The girl was never found. The night closer. Working at McDonald's during the day was fine, but being the last person to leave during the closing shift was an entirely different experience. Mark had been closing the store for months without incident, but something changed when a new batch of fryers were installed. He swore he could hear voices coming from the kitchen after midnight, faint whispers that seemed to rise from the bubbling oil. One night, after locking up, Mark did his final walkthrough. The dining room was dark, and the only light came from the glowing menu boards above the register. He walked past the fryers, and the whispers started again. This time, louder. They were too clear to be ignored. He turned off the machines, expecting the voices to stop, but they didn't. Instead, they grew sharper, more insistent. He could make out words now, but they were in a language he couldn't understand. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as the voices seemed to call to him from the deep fryer. Curiosity overcame his fear, and Mark slowly approached the fryer, leaning over to get a closer look. His breath fogged the steel, and then suddenly the bubbling oil churned violently. Something was rising from it. A hand, skeletal and covered in blistered, charred skin, emerged from the oil, reaching for him. Mark screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a chair as he ran out of the restaurant, not bothering to lock the door behind him. He never returned to work. A week later, another closer reported hearing strange voices coming from the fryer, but when they checked, nothing was there. After that, Management decided to shut down the store for renovations. The Drive-Thru Stranger. Working the drive-thru window at McDonald's wasn't glamorous, but for Haley, it was easy money. On slow nights, she would just wait for the occasional car, make idle chatter with coworkers, and scroll through her phone between orders. But there was one night Haley would never forget. It was nearing 1 a.m., and only a few customers had passed through. The roads were quiet, and the store was due to close soon. Haley was sitting at the window, bored, when she heard the ding indicating a car had pulled up to the speaker. She greeted them with her usual cheerful tone. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" There was a pause, and then a crackling sound, like static interference. A voice, cold and distorted, whispered back, "Can you help me?" Haley frowned. What can I get for you?" The voice was clearer this time, but still low. "Can you help me, please?" Haley felt a chill. "Help you with what?" There was silence for several long seconds, and then the voice came again, distant, barely audible. "I'm lost." She leaned out the window, peering into the night. The cameras showed no cars, no lights, nothing. But the speaker continued to hum faintly, as though someone was still on the other end. "Hello?" she called out. The voice crackled back to life, more urgent now. "I'm lost. I'm so cold." Haley's heart raced. She could feel her skin prickle with goosebumps. She knew there was no one there, but she couldn't explain why the voice sounded so real, so desperate. "Where are you?" she asked, trying to keep calm. There was another long pause, and then the voice whispered one final chilling word: "Behind." Haley's blood ran cold as she slowly turned her head. Standing right outside the drive-thru window, barely visible in the darkness, was a figure. It was tall and shadowy, with no discernible features. Its hand pressed against the glass, leaving a smeared wet mark that trailed downward. Haley screamed and slammed the window shut, backing away until she hit the counter. Her co-workers came running, but when they looked outside, the figure was gone. No cars had pulled up, and the cameras recorded nothing. Haley quit her job the next day. The manager's office. Every McDonald's has a manager's office, a cramped room filled with security monitors, paperwork, and the safe. In this particular McDonald's, the office was located in the back of the building, away from the public eye. It was the perfect place to be alone. But that wasn't always a good thing. The store's manager, Karen, had been hearing odd noises from the office for weeks. Tapping, scratching, the occasional whisper. She chalked it up to old pipes or distant voices from the dining room, but it was getting harder to ignore. One night, she was counting the cash after closing. The store was empty, and the only sound was the faint hum of the security cameras. As she tallied the money, the scratching started again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from inside the walls just behind her desk. Karen paused, staring at the wall. The scratching grew more frantic, like something was trying to claw its way out. Her pulse quickened as she reached for her phone, preparing to call maintenance. But before she could dial, a voice whispered from behind her. "I'm still here." Karen spun around, but no one was there. The door was closed, and the room was empty. Her heart raced, but she tried to steady herself. Maybe it was just her imagination. Then, the lights flickered. For a brief second, she saw something in the reflection of the computer screen. A face. Pale, gaunt, with empty black eyes staring back at her. Karen screamed and ran out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, she refused to go back in, delegating all office tasks to her assistant. Rumor has it that the office was built over an old basement, one that had been sealed off decades ago after a string of mysterious deaths. Some say the voices still call out from beneath the floor, looking for a way back to the surface.